Why is it so important that we get real commitment? Well, that sounds obvious. But the real reason why, there's a practical reason, because if we don't get commitment, then we're going to have the next dysfunction at our doorstep, and that is the avoidance of accountability. God bless you. This is the worst, most common problem. We have an online team assessment that teams take, and they get a scorecard back of this triangle that says green, yellow, red, which of the ones are good or bad. And this is usually the lowest score. What happens is when people haven't committed to a decision, they're not going to have the courage to hold one another accountable for that, for the behavior that goes with it. They're not going to have the courage to hold one another accountable. Notice what I said there. I didn't say the leader holding them accountable. I said them holding one another accountable. You see, on great teams, accountability is peer-to-peer. Peer pressure in your organization is the best kind of accountability. You want people turning to one another. What's the opposite of that is when people see a team member not supporting something, they go, oh, hey boss, I want to tell you, she's not supporting this. Don't tell her it was me that told you, but I just want you to know. Then the boss is like, oh, great, I get to go. And he goes to that person, hey, I understand you're not doing it. Who told you that? Oh, don't worry about who told you. I just want to, and now they're wondering who ratted them out, and there's all this politics, and the leader's dragged into it. What a great thing when people turn to one another. What's wrong? What's going on? I don't think this is what we agreed to. And give them the benefit of the doubt to explain what's happening, but call them on it directly. Okay? Now, how do we create a team environment where there's peer accountability and we as leaders are not getting dragged into it all the time? Well, there's an irony to this. The only way to create an environment where people will hold each other accountable is if we as leaders are willing to confront difficult issues. See, the irony is if I as a leader am willing to confront people, then people know, well, he's going to do it anyway, we might as well do it for each other. But if I as a leader do not like to hold people accountable, and let me tell you something, I don't. I'm bad at this one. This is my problem as a leader. I'm very aware of that. I do not like to hold people accountable. You know what that means? My team isn't going to do it. Why should they do it? Pat's going to let you off the hook anyway. See, the irony is by me not being willing to, they're not going to do it. By the way, there's a technical term for people who don't like to hold their folks accountable. I don't know if you've ever studied graduate level psychology or business, but I'm what's called a wuss. Okay? And you know what's funny? Most of the leaders I work with are also wusses. Most of them don't think so. In fact, most CEOs I work with will say, well, Pat, I don't have a problem with accountability. Let's just move right on to the next thing. And I'm like, well, that's great to know. Why do you say that, though? And they say, well, because I fire people all the time. I mean, I fired a guy just last week. Pick someone. I'll fire him right now just to prove it to you. Of course, firing someone is often the last act of cowardice, not accountability. Sometimes it's necessary. Oh, I know that. But oftentimes it's not. See, let me tell you a couple stories. I worked with a CEO once. He got hired by a big company that was kind of struggling. And they gave him the title of CEO, President, and Chief Operating Officer. He had all the big titles. A year after stabilizing this company, he went to the board of directors and he said, listen, I don't want to be the president and chief operating officer anymore. I just want to be the CEO and focus on strategy and externals. I want to hire somebody to run the day-to-day operations. The board said, hey, you've earned the right to do that. Fine. So he went out looking for a new president and chief operating officer. And while he was out looking, one of the members of his team, who I will call Fred started to tell his peers, I'm going to be the next president. It will be me. And I remember this, and I thought, it must be true. I mean, who would say that? Well, people did not like Fred at all on the executive team. He was not liked at all. And people were really concerned that they were going to have to work for this guy. So finally, one member of the executive team went to the CEO and said, can I ask you a question? The CEO said, sure. He said, did you know that Fred is telling everybody he's going to be the next president? And the CEO said, no, I had no idea. That's news to me. I had not heard that. And he said, okay, next question. Is he going to be the next president? The CEO said, oh, no, I would never do that. No, no, there's no chance, no. Oh, good. Okay, last question. Are you going to tell him to stop telling everybody that? Here's what the CEO said in this case verbatim, but I've heard this from many leaders over the years, the same kind of answer. The CEO said, oh, I don't have the time and the energy for that. I don't have the time and the energy for that. Now, I don't know about you, but can you imagine the CEO picking up the phone? Hey, Fred, it's the CEO. How you doing? Yeah. Hey, you're not going to be the next president. No, you're not. Yeah. You're kind of pissing me off that you're telling everybody that. Yeah, you should stop, buddy. Yeah, if you don't stop doing that, something bad's going to happen to you. Okay, have a great day. Bye-bye. Who's tired? I'm not tired. That took what, 10 seconds? I don't have the time and the energy for that. Once it happened to me directly. I was working for the CEO of a company. I was in charge of leadership development and organizational communication, right? And I had my annual budget review with his chief financial officer. And he was an old school curmudgeon-y CFO. And when we sat down to go through it, he said, Pat, before we get into your numbers, I'd like to tell you that if it were up to me, I'd fire you and your staff and put the savings to the bottom line of the company because I think what you do is silly. But I'm from California, so I thanked him for sharing. You know, I appreciated that. And then I said, Fred, I call him all Fred. I said, Fred, but these are the CEO's programs. And you don't like them. Why don't you just go have it out with him? He's your next door neighbor in this big company. And why don't you either convince him that you're right and put me out of my misery, or let him convince you that he's right and get on board? He said, I'm not going to talk to him. I don't care. And I said, then I will. Fine. Next day, I knocked on the CEO's door. I said, hey, Fred hates this stuff I'm doing for you. He doesn't, you got to talk to him about it. He goes, oh, that's just Fred. Everybody knows Fred's like that. I said, well, not everybody knows Fred because this company was the size of this room. And I said, and even if they do know Fred, it still hurts the programs and it makes the executive team look bad. And he said to me, oh, Pat, I don't have time for that. I got angry customers to deal with. I got lawsuits to worry about. I got Wall Street. I don't have time for that. Now, what do you notice about both of those examples? Neither of them didn't have the time and the energy to hold people accountable for missing their numbers 4 quarters in a row. Because all of us, even the wussiest of us leaders, will hold somebody accountable for quantitative results that are problematic. They didn't have the time and the energy to hold people accountable for their behaviors. Ladies and gentlemen, behavioral accountability always precedes the results. And we see the behaviors that we know are going to lead to problems, and yet it's the hardest thing as a leader to hold somebody accountable or to confront them about their behavior because we might be wrong, and it's a little subjective, and it seems judgmental, and they might not like it, so we just say, I'll just wait and see how the numbers turn out. Instead of having the courage, and it's courage, and love to confront them about the behaviors that they need to change. See, I don't like holding people accountable. And I used to think it was because I cared so much about my employees that I didn't want them to feel bad. And one day I realized it was selfishness that kept me from doing that because I didn't want them to blame me for feeling bad, and I didn't want to be around them when they did. Okay, you know who taught me the brilliance of and the importance of accountability? My son Connor. He's a management guru. But he's 15. But don't think I'm taking management advice from a 15-year-old, a teenager. He was 7 when he taught this to me. So Connor's a twin, and him and his brother Matthew got put into timeout. Matthew got put into timeout as I was getting ready to tell bedtime stories. So he had to leave the room, and I'm in the bunk bed with Connor telling him a bedtime story. About halfway through, Matthew comes back into the room and says, are you guys not done yet? And I said, no, we're halfway through the story. And like any good 7-year-old, he says, can I stay for the second half? Like any dad who's been around the block before, I say, sure, come on in, because I'm a wuss. So I start to tell the story. My wife comes in, Laura, thankfully not a wuss, and she says, what's he doing in here? And I'm like, well, he missed the first half. I thought he could stay for the second. She goes, no, Matt, you're out of here. You're in timeout. So Matthew does the walk of shame. The emotional guy that I am, I feel really bad for him. I feel sad that I put him through that. I turn around. Connor, my 7-year-old son, looks at me, and he says this, and he did. Dad, if you don't hold him accountable, he's never going to learn the consequences of his actions. Wah, wah, wah. 7 years old lecturing me, a management expert, about the need to hold people accountable. Here's the truth, though, and here's how I learned it. If we love someone, and I hope you love the people that work for you, you owe it to them to hold them accountable, even if they don't love you back for it. Many times they are not going to. We know this as parents, but we get in the working environment, we think, I don't really want to do that. We have to love someone enough, talk about selfless love, that we will hold them accountable even if they injure us for that.